Today's gospel reading, coming out of the 17th chapter of John, verses 11, 17, has a lot of powerful messages, but one very important message hopefully we can learn tonight and then remember for the rest of our lives. Now, I think this particular gospel reading can best be defined by one picture. A picture of a modern-day survival story. A picture of a modern-day miracle. Let's take a look at that picture. You might remember that picture. You might remember this story. It's the plane that landed in the Hudson River. It was January the 15th, 2009. 27 minutes after 3 in the afternoon on the cold January day, that plane takes off. With the moments of taking off, it runs into a group of Canadian geese. And these bird strikes compromise the engines of that jet. Once the engines were compromised, the pilot, a fellow by the name of Chesley Sullenberger, Captain Sully, he radioed to the tower letting them know that his plane was in trouble. And they directed him at that point where and what airport that he would need to land. And he responded by saying that he didn't have time to travel to that airport, that he would have to land his plane in the Hudson River. And from that point to the point of landing his plane in the Hudson River, what he did actually comes right out of today's gospel reading. It's amazing what he did. So let's take a look at the first verse of today's gospel reading. This is, as I said, the 17th chapter of John. This is going to be verse 11. Look what happens here. It says, lifting his eyes to heaven, Jesus prayed, saying, keep your eye feasted on that. You know, Jesus has two natures. Jesus is human, and Jesus is divine. Now, naturally, as a human, Jesus realized he would need to pray. But I always wonder, Jesus is also divine. Jesus is God. Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. Why would Jesus, as God, need to pray? Because his humanity and his divinity were commingled. They weren't separate. They were together. And Jesus is trying to teach all those who would read this section out of the 17th chapter of John the very important thing of taking the time to pray. When you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, every time Jesus performs a cure and every miracle that he attempts, with every healing that he offers. Before Jesus Christ cures, before he heals, before he offers a miracle, Jesus always stops and he prays first. And he looks up to heaven and he says, Heavenly Father, help me. For what I'm going to do is something that humans don't do. But I'm going to try this. Now let's go back to the picture of the plane. You know, there were 155 occupants on that plane. You can see them out in the wings. And Captain Sully, is in the top right corner. What's amazing that particular day is all 155 occupants, they were all saved. No one lost their life that day, landing that plane in the Hudson River. What an incredible accomplishment. And there was a reason, I think, for that particular occurrence. You know, after that story unfolded and once it concluded and all the passengers were home with their family safe and sound, for months that followed that incident, Captain Sully was interviewed by literally hundreds of news stations around the world. And in the course of the interviews, he was always asked many questions, but whenever he was asked this one particular question, he always gave the exact same answer. When he was asked the question, Captain Sully, when you realized that plane was in trouble, what did you do? And every time he was asked that question, he always gave the same answer, and this is what he said. Because it's a message for all of us. And actually, it's based upon the scriptural readings. Probably every time prior to Jesus performing a cure, a miracle, or healing, this is what Jesus did. But clearly, this is what happens in the 17th chapter of John, verses 11 to 17, our text for today. Every time he was asked the question, when you realized that plane was in trouble, what did you do? And this was always his answer. He said this, and I won't interrupt it because it's so important. He said, I prayed then I went to work. Did you hear that combination? He said, I prayed, then I went to work. What he's saying is, I realize God's going to have to help me, but I'm going to have to help myself. He didn't say, I prayed, then I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and I waited around to see what God's going to do. He realized the answer to prayer doesn't work that way. Folks, it's true for all of us. You need to be an active participant in prayer, but you need to be an active participant in having your own prayer answered. You see, God needs to work with you. You cannot say to God, I want to become a better husband, and then do absolutely nothing at all to become a better husband. You cannot buy a piano and have it brought to your house and placed in your living room and put it in a corner and then say, God, I want to become a pianist. I want to be one of the great pianists. And then you never practice. You might say to yourself, well, I pray to God to be a good piano player, but it never happened. Because what God's going to say is, I needed the prayer, but you needed to do something that would help me help you to become a great piano player. You see, you have to do your part. Heavenly Father, allow me to be a great mother. You can pray that prayer. But if you don't put any effort into becoming a great mother or a better mother or a great student or to do well in your test, you just pray that these things happen. You do absolutely nothing to make those things happen. You're aggressive in prayer but passive in action, then nothing's ever going to happen in your life. You just won't be successful. You're going to sit back and say, my prayer has never been answered. God doesn't answer my prayers. Well, we know this much. God has heard your prayers, but you haven't done anything to help him help you have your prayers answered. Now, when you look at that plain there in Hudson River, the answer that he gave, I've always held on to from the time that happened back in January 15, 2009. And in his first interview, when he gives that answer to that question, I just say to myself, I hope everyone who needs a prayer answered, I hope they are hearing what he has to say, because that's how prayer gets answered. Because God says to all of us, whatever your concern, your needs are, I will help you help yourself. But if you're not willing to help yourself, then I can't help you. So I'll leave you with this. Every time he's asked a question, when you realize that plane was in trouble, what did you do? And the answer is consistently always given. I prayed, then I went to work.